The glass chandelier above shimmered as if mocking me, its golden light bouncing across the crowded ballroom. I barely had time to steady myself when my uncle's hand slammed into my shoulder. "Off the stage, Claire!" he barked, his voice cutting like a whip. The force sent me stumbling, my heels scraping the polished floor. Gasps echoed, but no one moved to help me. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation. Be honest, tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. Laughter erupted instead. Ugly, merciless laughter. My cousins, my aunt, even distant relatives smirked as if it were some kind of family sport. "Trying to steal attention again, huh?" Uncle Richard sneered, his eyes scanning my crimson dress like it was an insult carved in fabric. "Who wears red to his graduation party? You never change, always desperate to be seen." Heat stung my face, but I stood tall, my palms trembling at my sides. I'd promised myself years ago I wouldn't let them see me cry again. But that didn't stop the knot tightening in my throat. Maybe she thought she was the main act, my cousin Sarah chimed in, her champagne glass tilted, her eyes gleaming with cruelty. The laughter grew louder. My mother looked away. My father pressed his lips together but said nothing. Silence from them always felt like betrayal. I wanted to vanish, to disappear into the marble floor. But before the shame could swallow me whole, a voice cut through the air. Low, steady, and commanding. "Sorry I'm late, love." Every head snapped toward the entrance. My husband Daniel stepped inside. His black suit clung perfectly to his tall frame, his tie slightly loosened, his presence radiating authority. He moved with a calm that was louder than any shout, and then he looked at me, just me, and the room seemed to shift. He crossed the ballroom slowly, each step echoing. Eyes followed him, whispers darting across the crowd. They knew him, of course. Everyone knew him. But no one expected him to show up here. Uncle Richard scoffed nervously. "Well, look who finally—" But Daniel didn't let him finish. He reached me, his hand sliding gently around my waist, steadying me, grounding me. His eyes met mine, filled with warmth no one else in that room had ever shown me. "You okay?" he murmured. His voice meant for me but loud enough for everyone to hear the tenderness in it. I nodded faintly, but my lips trembled. I didn't need to answer. The humiliation was still raw on my skin. Daniel turned then, facing them. Facing all of them. The room quieted like someone had cut the sound. Even the music playing in the background seemed to fade into silence. "You think pushing my wife down makes you powerful?" he said, his voice calm but edged with something sharp enough to cut glass. His gaze locked on Richard. "Because all I see is a coward desperate for attention." The laughter was gone now. Eyes widened. Hands gripped champagne glasses tighter. A ripple of unease spread through the room, and then Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. Uncle Richard paled. My mother gasped. What Daniel pulled out next left everyone frozen. Daniel's hand slid into his jacket pocket, and for a heartbeat, you could hear nothing but the sharp clink of glasses being set down, the nervous shuffle of expensive shoes against marble floors. My uncle's smugness faltered, his throat tightening as Daniel pulled out. Not a weapon, not anything threatening, but a small velvet box. The room gasped. Daniel flicked it open, revealing a diamond bracelet, elegant, glimmering, and impossibly beautiful under the chandelier lights. He turned toward me, his voice smooth but carrying weight that no one in the room could ignore. "Claire," he said, fastening the bracelet around my wrist with care, "I came here to remind you of something they've all forgotten." He lifted my hand for everyone to see. "You're not the shadow in this family. You're the only light in it." Gasps rippled through the hall. My mother's face flushed crimson, torn between pride and shame. Sarah's champagne glass slipped in her hand, almost spilling, her smile evaporating. Richard's jaw tightened. "Enough of this dramatics," Richard barked, his voice strained now. "You don't belong here flashing money like you're—" Daniel's eyes snapped to him, calm but searing. "Money?" His tone sharpened. "This isn't about money. This is about respect. Something you clearly don't understand. The crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers buzzed like angry bees. I felt my breath catch, my humiliation melting into something else, something like power. Because for once, they weren't laughing. They were silent. Daniel stepped forward, his arm still around me, shielding me, owning the space like it was his stage now. You shoved her off that stage because of a dress? His words sliced through the silence. Because she had the audacity to exist where you couldn't stand her shining brighter? Richard chuckled, but it was hollow now. She always needs attention, Daniel. Daniel cut him off. No, you need her silence. That's what bullies thrive on, isn't it? But guess what? She doesn't owe you silence anymore. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would echo in the ballroom. Daniel wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His voice was even, steady, but laced with an authority that no one dared to challenge. And then, with deliberate calm, he reached into his pocket again and pulled out a sleek envelope. White, heavy, marked with gold trim. He held it up between two fingers. This, he said, eyes still on Richard, is the contract your bank signed 2 weeks ago. The room stirred. My father's face blanched. Sarah's hand clamped over her mouth. Richard's smirk collapsed completely. What are you talking about? Daniel's lips curled into the faintest smile. Your family company, Hayes Logistics. It's been drowning in debt for months. You mortgaged it right down to its bones. And now? He tapped the envelope against his palm slowly. It's mine. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. I swear I could hear someone drop a fork on the buffet table in the corner. My uncle's face drained of all color, his arrogance evaporating in front of dozens of stunned relatives. You're lying, Richard whispered hoarsely. This is a party, not a funeral? Daniel interrupted. His gaze was steel. Because that's exactly what it feels like. The funeral of your so-called power. And you know what's poetic? He glanced at me, his tone softening only for me. The man who pushed my wife down just lost the ground under his own feet. The whispers exploded now. Everyone was talking at once. Disbelief, shock, eyes darting between Richard and Daniel like they were watching a court case unfold in real time. I stood there frozen, my hand trembling in Daniel's, that diamond bracelet catching every shard of light in the room. For years, I'd been the family's scapegoat, the overdressed, overdramatic, unwanted niece. And in one moment, Daniel had turned their laughter into silence, their mockery into fear. Richard staggered forward, his voice cracking. You can't do this. This is our family legacy. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Family legacy? You mean the empire you gambled away because you couldn't manage it? The empire you mocked her for never being part of, when the truth is she's the only one worthy of it. His words landed like blows. No shouting. No violence. Just truth, sharp enough to cut deeper than any wound. My father tried to speak. Daniel, surely there's some kind of misunderstanding. No, George. Daniel's voice hardened. The only misunderstanding here is thinking silence would protect your daughter. It didn't. But I will. He turned back to Richard, his eyes cold now. As of this morning, I own controlling shares. You, Richard Hayes, work for me. The crowd erupted in stunned murmurs. My aunt clutched Richard's arm, her face pale as marble. Sarah's fake smile crumbled completely, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one standing small in the corner. I was standing tall, with Daniel's hand on mine, watching the man who humiliated me crumble in front of the same audience that had laughed at me minutes ago. And deep down, I knew. This was just the beginning. Richard's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. His chest rose and fell like he was struggling to breathe, his jaw clenching so tightly the veins in his neck stood out. For the first time in my life, the man who always stood tall at family gatherings looked small. You think you can walk in here? Richard hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Daniel. And humiliate me in front of my own family? Daniel didn't flinch. No, Richard, he said coolly. You did that yourself when you shoved my wife off that stage. The murmurs in the room grew louder, cutting like static. Some relatives avoided looking at me entirely, while others shifted uncomfortably, suddenly ashamed of their laughter. The air was thick, buzzing, like the moments before a storm. Richard stumbled forward another step, but this time, his words weren't aimed at Daniel. They were aimed at me. You, he spat, his eyes narrowing on me. You always wanted to play the victim, to turn people against me. You think that dress makes you special? You think standing there beside him makes you powerful? You're still nothing without this family. The words cut, sharp, familiar. I had heard them in different forms for years. But tonight something inside me shifted. I wasn't trembling anymore. My heart was still pounding, but instead of shame, it burned with fire. I straightened my shoulders, my voice clear as I answered, No, Richard. I'm nothing without my dignity. And you tried to strip that from me tonight. But you failed. The room froze. For the first time, I had spoken back, not with anger, but with conviction. My mother's eyes widened. Sarah's jaw slackened. Even my father's hands fidgeted nervously, as if he didn't know whose side to be on. Richard scoffed, but it was weaker now. Dignity? Don't make me laugh. This family built everything you stand on. And now you're siding against us? Daniel's hand squeezed mine gently. No, I said firmly, locking eyes with Richard. I'm siding against cruelty, against the years of mockery, against the silence that let people like you think it was okay to humiliate me. A hush swept across the ballroom. My words had sliced through years of buried shame. Richard's laughter rang out, forced and bitter. She's got a tongue now, doesn't she? You think one bracelet and a signature on paper makes you better than me? Daniel stepped forward, his voice sharper now. It's not the bracelet. It's not the contract. It's the fact that you showed this entire family who you really are. And Claire. He looked at me with something so steady it made my chest ache. Showed them who she really is. Stronger than you'll ever be! Richard lunged forward, his hand jerking up like he wanted to grab Daniel by the collar. But before he could, my father stepped between them. Enough! George's voice cracked through the tension. His face was pale, his hands shaking, but his eyes darted nervously toward Daniel. This has gone too far. Daniel tilted his head. Too far? George, what's too far is standing by while your daughter is humiliated. What's too far is allowing her to be pushed, mocked, laughed at, while you stayed silent. My father's lips parted, but no words came out. His silence was its own confession. Dad, I said quietly, my voice trembling with hurt, but steady with truth. You've been quiet my whole life when they did this. Do you know how it feels to stand alone while your own parents look away? The room shifted. Some of the older relatives lowered their gazes. My mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. Richard let out a sharp laugh. Oh, please. This is pathetic. You're all acting like she's some saint. She's been nothing but a burden since she was a child. That word, burden, hit me like ice. But instead of shrinking, I let it fuel me. I stepped closer, my voice loud and unflinching. A burden is someone who tears others down to feel tall. A burden is someone who mocks, shoves, and humiliates his own family to cover his failures. That's not me, Richard. That's you, the crowd gasped. It wasn't just Daniel's confrontation anymore. It was mine. Richard's face twisted in rage, his hand trembling, but before he could respond, Daniel pulled the contract envelope from his pocket again and handed it to my father. Read it, Daniel said. His voice was calm, final. Every word is legal. Every signature binding. As of this morning, Richard Hayes answers to me. George hesitated, his hands shaking as he took the envelope. He slid the papers out, scanning them with disbelief. His lips trembled as his eyes darted from line to line. Finally, he looked up at Richard, his voice hollow. It's true, he whispered. The silence was deafening. My aunt nearly dropped her glass. Sarah whispered something under her breath, but her words were lost in the heavy air. Richard's knees buckled, his arrogance collapsing in real time. He staggered back, gripping a chair for support. The once untouchable, untamed uncle stood there like a man stripped of everything, and for the first time, I didn't pity him. I looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every relative who had laughed when I fell. Their shame was painted on their faces now. They couldn't hide behind Richard's power anymore, because Daniel had ripped it away, and I had refused to stay silent. For the first time in years, I felt taller than the stage I'd been pushed off, but deep down I knew this wasn't over. The fall of Richard Hayes was just beginning. Richard's grip on the chair tightened until his knuckles went white. His lips trembled, trying to form words, but the crowd's silence was suffocating. The power he'd worn like armor all his life had cracked, shattered right there in front of everyone. This is a trick," Richard muttered, his voice hollow now. "You set this up. Daniel's tone was calm but merciless. "No tricks, just consequences. The contracts were signed weeks ago. You knew the debt was real, Richard. You just didn't think it would catch up to you so fast." The room buzzed with nervous whispers. Everyone who had laughed minutes earlier now stared at him with wide eyes, as if realizing they had backed the wrong man. My aunt's hand hovered near her mouth, her face pale. Sarah whispered harshly to another cousin, but their hushed voices carried no weight anymore. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the bracelet Daniel had given me gleaming with every movement. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking toward shame, I was walking toward justice. "Uncle Richard," I said, my voice steady though my chest thundered. "You've spent years telling me I didn't belong, that I was nothing. But tonight, you proved it wasn't me who didn't belong. It was you. A man who humiliates his own family to mask his failures doesn't deserve a stage." Richard's jaw clenched, his face blotchy with rage. "Don't you dare lecture me." "Yes, I will," I cut in, louder now. The words spilled out, sharp and unrelenting. "Because every insult, every time you made me feel small, every laugh at my expense, it all ends here. Tonight, I'm not the one they're laughing at. Tonight, you are." The crowd erupted, not with laughter, but with clapping. Tentative at first, then louder. A cousin near the back began it, then another, and suddenly applause echoed through the hall. Richard's face twisted as he spun on them. "You hypocrites!" he roared. "You cheered for me for years, and now you clap for her?" But the more he shouted, the smaller he looked. His anger wasn't power anymore, it was desperation. Daniel raised his hand slightly, and the clapping quieted. His voice was calm, commanding, filling the space with finality. "This family has lived too long in fear of one man's shadow. That ends tonight. From now on, respect won't be optional. It will be earned." Then he looked down at me, his tone softening. "And Claire has earned it more than anyone here." Tears stung my eyes, but they weren't from pain. For the first time, they were from pride. Richard shook his head violently, his voice breaking. "You think you've won? You'll regret this." "No," I said firmly, cutting him off. "I don't regret anything. What I regret is all the years I stayed silent while you made me a punchline. That silence is over." The words hung in the air like a verdict. And in that moment, everyone knew the verdict was final. Richard stumbled back, clutching the chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His wife pulled at his arm, whispering frantically, but he brushed her off and stormed toward the exit. The crowd parted for him, but not with respect, with pity, with relief. The heavy doors slammed behind him. The sound echoed through the hall like a gavel. I stood there, trembling but tall, surrounded by faces that finally saw me differently. No one dared laugh, no one dared smirk. The silence was thick, filled with the weight of a shift that couldn't be undone. My mother stepped forward, her voice shaky. "Claire, I shook my head softly. "Don't. You stood by and said nothing when I was humiliated. Tonight I don't need your words. I needed them years ago." Her lips pressed shut, guilt flickering across her face. My father avoided my eyes, his shoulders sagging under a truth too heavy to carry. Daniel's arm wrapped around me, pulling me close, anchoring me in the middle of that storm. He leaned down just enough for only me to hear, "They'll never forget this night." And I knew he was right. As we turned to leave, I glanced back at the ballroom, the chandeliers, the stage I'd been pushed from, the family that had once relished my humiliation. Now, the same people stared at me not with laughter, but with awe. Because the girl who had been shoved off the stage wasn't gone. She had climbed back on it, higher, stronger, and unshakable. When the doors closed behind us, the silence inside was shattered forever. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking out in shame. I was walking out in victory. And Richard Hayes? His downfall had only just begun.